Hello and bienvenue. I'm your host, Anaïs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Her Career, Her Coach, the podcast dedicated to empowering women to build a career they are truly passionate about. What a way to finish season 2, everyone. I had a pinch me moment when I first heard from Laura to come to the podcast. I've probably shared her TED Talk, Find Your Dream Job, without even looking at your resume with most of my clients. And I cannot wait to dive into Laura's career journey. So let's do this, shall we? Laura, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
It is very, very exciting. So for those of you, and I think some of you probably would have heard, obviously, because I've shared the TED Talk, but for those of you who haven't, is that okay to share more about you and what you do?
Sure. I have spent 3 decades now being a coach, and most of that time helping people figure out what to do with their life. So when people contact me and they say, oh, I want help with my resume, I want help with my LinkedIn, I want help with the job search, that's not me. I'm the person who really helps you figure out who you are and what you want, and then set you on a course to get it. So the Tedx talk and my book, Now What 90 Days to a New Life Direction, really present an inside out process to figuring out what you want.
This is so exciting. And you've just mentioned it is 3 decades. And I know briefly talked about that when we first met, but I have to ask again, what have you seen changing and evolving when it comes to the people who come to you, the people that you have worked with over those 3 decades, when it comes to that quest, of finding who you truly are and what you truly want, and make sure that whatever you're doing next really aligns with that?
Well, there was a time, 9/11, the terrorist attack on the United States, that was a defining moment in terms of things that changed. So before that, people used to call me their secret weapon, to help them get advancement and get promotions. And, I was the secret weapon.
Yeah.
But really, 9/11 happened. My phone was quiet for 4 days. And then after 4 days, it exploded with people saying anything can happen. Life is too short. I've got to take the back burner dream and put it on the front burner. I'm just not happy. I need to do something more meaningful. So there was just this tsunami of people really questioning the meaning of work in their life. And that was a defining moment. And that's what I've been working on with people ever since. So like I said, it used to be promotions, getting ahead. Then in the 90s, work-life balance became chic.
Became bougie.
Yeah, it was bougie because the economy was good and people could just
they could afford to think about that.
They could afford to say, oh, well, I'm not coming to your company unless I have a gym membership and Fridays off. And so that was that period. And then really it's only accelerated after 2001 of people wanting to do something more meaningful, making sure work aligns with their values. And then we saw the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that has changed work even more because nobody wants to go back to an office. So companies have had to deal with people really demanding that work look different. So I couldn't be happier. I grew up with a father who hated his job. It made all our lives miserable. It made me feel so guilty, I remember telling my father, I don't need to go to university. I can pay for it myself eventually. Please just be happy, find something else to do. And he just had this sense of duty that he could do nothing but provide. And he didn't care. Well, he cared, but he didn't pay mind to the cost to him emotionally.
Wow.
And I don't think people want to live like that anymore. So it's just been so interesting to watch.
Do you think your personal story and what you've just shared about your father has had an impact on the decision that you've made when it comes to what you're doing with your life and career?
Oh, there's no question. I really wanted to be study theater in college and university, and my parents would not allow that. My father was like, if I'm paying for school, you're not doing that. So I, after college, went to New York City for almost a decade and pursued musical theater because I didn't want to be 35 years old and have never tried and then have a lifestyle that acting could not support. So I was relatively successful as an actor and then found coaching. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. And all 3 of my father's children have not pursued a traditional route like he did.
Interesting. Very
so it
interesting.
definitely had an impact. Definitely.
And talking about having an impact, what is it that you love the most about what you do?
Well, that's definitely one of that, having an impact.
Yeah.
But just really seeing people question even their own rules about how they live life.
Yeah.
And to see them be open to having different criteria for their success and for their happiness, that just makes me really just, it's very rewarding to see people who think there's no way out, there's no other way to make a living, there's, no one's going to hire me for this other thing that I want to do, and to see them take the small steps that finally add up to getting to a new direction or a dream is just incredibly gratifying.
Oh, I can personally resonate with what you're saying right here. And from what I've seen from the conversation I've had myself, I feel like a lot of the time people think there is a right way to do things, but when they understand that there is no such thing as a right way, there's just the way that works for them, it alleviates so much of the pressure that they themselves have put on their shoulders, or society or the environment, or, whoever has been around to actually, make them believe that.
Yeah, so much of how people decide about their lives is externally driven, by society, by parents, by expectations, and part of the work that I do in the Now What program is to help people look at why they made certain decisions in their life. Like, we don't look at, like, the name of the TED Talk is How to Find Your Dream Job Without Ever Looking at Your Resume. Like, I don't look at people's resumes. I do a life story process, and I help them discover through their life story, where they got off track, where they got away from what I call their life blueprint, the thing that's uniquely in their DNA, that's uniquely theirs, it's their unique contribution. And so many times people, make a turn in another direction just based on other people's expectations.
And what I've also seen, I do some form of that as well with my clients. What I've also seen at that part of the process, when we very much look at their life journey so far, is that they tend to dismiss very, very quickly some of the things that actually could have had so much more meaning very much earlier on in their career and life journey. But for X, Y, and Z reasons, like you were saying, potentially external factors, they just dismissed that and it's just moved on. So I think it's also about the importance of giving the space to people to reconnect with such things and feelings.
Yes, and also coming to recognize that sometimes, something that they missed in the past or didn't pursue in the past may not come back exactly the same way. Like, it may be more of an analogy, or it may be a flavor that needs to be included.
Yeah.
But, let's say someone who grew up thinking they were going to be a ballerina, and, they didn't. Are they going to be a ballerina at 45 years old? Probably not. But it's really pulling that apart and figuring out, well, what is it about being a ballerina? Is it beauty, grace, movement, culture? What is it? And how do we borrow those pieces and get them into your life today? So I often say that, like, the formula is something from your past mixed together with the resume of the present equals the next step.
Nice. I love that. I very much love that. So let's talk a little bit more about you, because now we know all about what you do. Obviously, very much resonate with that. And again, I'm so glad you're here. If I were to ask you your career achievements and the top 3 that comes to mind, what would you say?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'd even start back in the acting days, so it was an achievement to become a union actor, to be a professional, to be deemed a professional.
Right.
It was always important to me to be able to, I do that with coaching too. I'm a master credentialed coach with the International Coach Federation to, reach a certain level of credibility.
Yeah.
I'll have to put writing books and being on the Oprah Winfrey Show as achievements in the coaching world.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that it's been like 20 something years since I've been on Oprah. People still ask me. And they say, I remember. I'm like, no, you do not remember. There's no way you remember. And then I'd say, reaching, I've now lost count, but I've done over 10,000 hours as a coach. So if, according to, I think it's Malcolm Gladwell, that it takes 10,000 hours to become a master at something, I never stopped studying. I never stopped evolving. So, and in fact, I've never stopped coaching. Even when there was a time that I traveled a lot and I was, more of a speaker and a writer than than a coach. I never gave up my coaching clients. I felt like that would have been out of integrity to go around the world speaking about the benefits of coaching, which I had the opportunity to do without still being a coach myself. So I've never gone without having clients. Like that is just so important to me that I'm practicing the craft.
Absolutely. And how do you feel just speaking out loud and sharing this with us?
I'm sitting here feeling like, wow.
Yes, right?
Not so bad. Good job.
Yes, 100%. You mean if I were to be able to sit where you are in 3 decades time and share such achievements, especially, for example, what you just mentioned towards the end around, mastering your craft for 10,000 hours, then I would definitely feel the same. Wow, not so bad at all.
Not so bad. And there's always more to learn. I've definitely learned as a coach, like the minute you think you have it figured out, you'll be humbled, So I never have it figured out, just like no one ever has life figured out. And it's just a beautiful thing to see. I mean, I've always worked with the premise that my vision is that everyone on the planet is a coach, right? And that's not that the whole world is full of professional coaches, but we know that when we coach one person, it really changes not only them, but the lives that they touch in their life.
Yeah. So it's the ripple effect, isn't it?
Yeah. So the ripple effect of they're a different parent, they're a different teacher, they're a different coworker, they're a different leader. And that just, that I hold that vision for everyone evolving and growing. And as much as the news is so terrible in the world and we have weather catastrophes and just, it's a scary world, to make your days about bringing out the better part of human beings and raising consciousness is a hopeful place to be, because you get to see the good side of humanity.
You do. And I mean, with those thousands of hours that you've done, you probably have seen that a lot as well. Sometimes you also go through the journey with some clients where you get to see, if I may call it this way, the bad side of people, or at least, some experiences that they had to go through that was not necessarily easy, might have involved, some trauma to whatever shape or form. And yet from that, you always see, or at least this is what has happened, and I'd love to hear your views on that. For people who are potentially even listening to this right now and not necessarily feeling like they are in a good place, there is always something that you can learn from navigating, difficult situation or potentially difficult people that you're working with or that you have in your surrounding, that you can actually take as a lesson learned and take it with you moving forward to actually not, replicate that pattern or to actually do something with that.
It's so hard, when you hit a rough patch. And I've hit them myself. I mean, the thing to remember is that it's temporary. The good stuff is temporary and the bad stuff is temporary. And that's probably the hardest thing to remember when you're going through a bad period, that this is temporary and it will shift, and you stay in action, or at least in it, trying to harness a sense of wonder so that you can, learn and explore and evolve. And, even if you've been terribly hurt or betrayed in some way, that we can create something better out of that mishap.
Absolutely. And I know we've talked about your career achievements. You've mentioned a couple of times how you've been sort of driven to continue your learning, your development, and so on. So I have to ask, what would you say are your top 3 values, like really the thing that drives you?
Oh my goodness. My top 3 values. Learning is a top value.
That makes sense.
Integrity, which, that can be a tough ride sometimes, because people sometimes don't meet your expectation or your definition of what integrity is.
Yep.
And, I'm going to say connection, because I grew up in a different country. I was born in the US, but I lived in Venezuela from 6 years old to 12 years old. And as a child, children will learn the language faster than their parents. So at 5 years old, I learned Spanish very quickly. I integrated myself very quickly. I mean, that has followed me in my whole life. Like, I culturally can adjust to different cultures, whether that culture be a corporation or an industry, or I have literally traveled to places and coached, people who don't understand my language, but I can still coach them, right? And also I studied to become an interfaith minister, because I felt like people were so misinformed about at the time, Islam, because after 9/11, people were just so worked up about what it means to be a Muslim, and people confusing that with it only means you're an extremist. So I went and studied 14 religions so that I can connect with people and explain, like I knew enough to be dangerous. I just knew a little bit about everything. I'm not a scholar by any means, but so I'd say connection is a huge value because of those experiences and because of wanting people to understand each other and, culturally, and whenever I hear someone speak hatefully of another group, all that tells me is that they never sat down and shared a meal with anyone from that group.
Yeah.
Because you can always connect with humanity.
There is always something to connect with. 100%.
There's always something to connect with. So it's just ignorance. And, wow, we're really like talking about my twisting and turning journey as I tell these stories, because I went so far as to run for political office in the US twice, in 2017 and in 2019, because of wanting to connect people and have them understand what was at stake in our country and still is. We don't have to get into politics, but I'll just say that much.
No, but thank you so much for indulging me in that question. So we said learning, integrity, and connection.
Yep.
I love that. Okay.
I'm going to write those down.
Yeah, it's one of those. I know for you, it was, I could afford such question as in for you to think about it on the spot. I know for a lot of people, it definitely takes a lot of time to actually understand what really drives them. But I love also what you said very briefly around the piece of integrity, because, or even the last one around connection, because essentially those are what values are about, is that they trigger something in you, either a source of inspiration to do better, to drive you moving forward, or they could trigger you in the other way when people are not meeting you where you're at when it comes to such values. So yes, thank you for that. Let's have a look at it on the other side. I always love to talk about challenges, so I'm not going to say more than that. If I were to ask you your top 3, Laura, what would you say?
Top 3 challenges. I still am challenged by, I'm going to say this, but it's like 25% of me versus 75%. So there's 25% of me that still takes things personally. So I'd say that's a challenge.
Interesting. How do you deal with that before you move on to the next one?
How do I deal with that? I have to really work hard to go, what is really about me and what's really about the other person or scenario? And sometimes it gets back to my high value for integrity.
Yep.
Because I want to be truthful about something and somebody else may not be truthful, or they may not show remorse for something that they did, or they may not see that they did anything offensive or wrong, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone's definition is different. So the opposite of that one is the challenge of not taking things personally. Let's see, what would be another challenge? Not eating all the Christmas cookies. Does that count?
It's like a mini challenge, but it's not like a...
It's not a big world challenge.
I mean, if it's on your top 3, like, kudos to you, Laura. I think you've got everything figured out. Let's put it this way.
No. I got to think of one more challenge. So sugar's a challenge. And then just remembering to, I'm an achiever and I'm a starter. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm not a finisher, but I'm a starter. I always have new ideas.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really a challenge to, see something all the way through and be grateful instead of always looking for the next thing.
Point that I resonate with personally as well, 100%.
Aha.
If I were to give it one more space when it comes to challenges and tweak it to your career challenges, I'm assuming sugar might still be in the equation, but maybe not as much. So what would that be?
Let's see. When to let go of something. You know what I mean? Like I will keep trying a different way to do something many, many, many times instead of just let it go and see if it comes back on its own.
Yeah. It reminds me, I believe, is it Eisenhower, who said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I actually find 1,000 ways for it not to work. I'm completely butchering the quote, but hopefully you've got it.
There's something in there.
Absolutely. I'll find it later down the line and make sure that I've got this right. But
I think it's Thomas Edison, that quote.
Okay, there we go. So let's go for Thomas Edison quote then on this. everyone who's listening to this, I'm very sorry if I offend anyone, but you've got the idea when it comes to actually trying something. And like you said, it's the moment where you actually realize, when do I have to stop?
Right.
So how do you navigate that?
I've been more willing to survey my audience instead of making decisions in a vacuum. I survey my audience and, what do they want? What do they not want? What's working? What do they want to hear more about? Did they try this product and how did they feel about it? So I do a lot of exit interviews when people have been clients, or if they use one of our programs. I'm always getting feedback, and that helps me, not guess.
Yeah.
Make more educated decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I've actually just found the quote, so we'll make sure we've got this right today. It's from Thomas Edison, and it's, I will not say I have failed 1,000 times. I will say I discovered there are 1,000 ways that this can cause failure. So there we go.
There you go. Good job.
Well done. You've got the name right, and I've just butchered everything else. So there we go. On that note, I'd love to pick your brain. Obviously, again, I'm feeling very privileged to have this conversation with you today. So for anyone who's listening to this, who would love to get into your brain too, I want to know, what would be your top tips based on all of your decades of experience, all of the coaching you've seen and the conversation you've had with your clients? Anyone who's looking to make the most out of their career, what would be your top tips to them?
Always network. Always, not just when you're looking for a job.
Yes.
But to be maintaining your relationships, even if it's just quarterly, putting out a note to people saying hello. So being visible in your field, having exposure in your industry, if there's a conference or an association, that's really important. It's managing your own expectations is very important. Everything's about expectations and communication, right? You can't make anyone else responsible for expectations you didn't communicate. So
very true.
Communicating expectations, communicating clearly. Be careful of taking on too many responsibilities that nobody else wants. Because what I learned in the theater is that it's harder to find a new understudy than it is to find a new star. So when you become too dependable, there's a fine line. You have to become that dependable person to move up the ladder at first, and then become less dependable and less available as you want to be seen as a leader.
Very interesting. And I think I do work with most of my clients who identify as women, as working mothers. And I feel that dependability we just mentioned here is super key, both at work and personally. And I guess the question is, how do you find the right balance? You just mentioned it, right? At the beginning of your career, you can afford, if I can put it this way, to obviously be more dependable. But how do you actually move away if you feel you're in a position where you're very much too much dependable?
That one's hard once you've created a precedent, right? Like we teach people how to treat us, right? So we have created this precedence that you can ask me anything, I'll do anything, I'll be available all the time. So when you want to try to fix that, you have to be very on purpose about it. Like, you really have to even tell people, in the past, you've been used to me being available after 10 p.m. at night, let's say. But moving forward, I need you to know that I need to get everything done before 6 p.m. and I will not be answering my phone at night anymore, right? You have to set really firm boundaries. Sometimes it's impossible to change it because you've just, this is how people see you. And then they think that you're not performing, which is not true. Just you're performing differently. So that sometimes means you need to change places of where you're at so you can start fresh somewhere else. But that's a good thing for people to keep in mind. If you do start someplace new, we want to make that good first impression. And there we go again, being dependable. It's like, no, set the boundaries from the beginning and, do a great job, but set the boundaries from the beginning and don't fall into that trap.
That makes sense. Okay. Any other recommendations that you have? This one obviously was a very important one, additionally to the networking.
Learning the politics of the office a little bit. I mean, every culture is different, but being sensitive to that, it's a real thing. And the more you study human dynamics, the more interesting it becomes, right? So you can start spotting, who's the domineering one and who's more submissive and who's a leader and a follower. So the more you can educate yourself about how people behave, the easier time you'll have.
That makes sense.
In an organization.
I love that. So I guess that brought me to another question. What would you have told your younger self, let's say, who started 3 decades ago, as an advice, now that you're 3 decades down the line, to make the most out of her career?
Stop worrying. That's what I would tell myself. Yes. I mean, it was hard to go from actor with no network to self-employed person looking for clients.
Yeah.
And I remember, it was 2.5 years in when I finally said to myself, like, you have to stop worrying about, 1 client came in, 3 clients left, 2 clients came in, 2 clients left. And that helped tremendously for things to go more smoothly. It's funny to say how many hours and how many years and decades and realize, wow, I always thought it was going to go away all the time. And look, it didn't. So when do you stop worrying?
Yeah. When is a very important question. How does that work?
It's a combination of being mindful that you remain relevant and up to date, but at the same time, trust that you're doing the right thing. You're on the right path. And if it's not this, it'll be something else.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're bringing this one up, actually, because from what I've seen, a lot of people are very much afraid of failure. So very much afraid of going down the wrong path, which sometimes paralyze them, or like you said, put them in a state of worrying too much. Any recommendations on that?
It's so hard to stay in the moment, right? We're just creatures of habit that, all worry is about a future that's not here yet.
True.
Right? And we're making up what we think is going to happen. So why don't we make up the story to be more positive, since it's just fiction anyway?
Yeah.
Right. So we're either thinking about the past or we're worrying about the future. And the hardest thing is to just stay in the moment. And part of that is our planning instincts. We just want to plan and we want to be certain and we want to know we're organized and all that. But ultimately, again, I'll use a theater analogy. Actors will rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, but on opening night, you just let go.
Yeah, you have to.
And you stop thinking about it and you just embody it.
Mm.
And I think that that's good advice for life. Just embody it. You're good.
Yeah. I don't know what you think of the acronym FAIL, which actually stands for First Attempt in Learning as well. I think there is always something that you can learn, like you said, from navigating a situation that might raise some feeling of uncertainty or failure, actually thinking what I'm going to learn from it. And like you said, like making sure you ground yourself as well in the moment rather than worrying about a potential future that doesn't exist is also super key.
Exactly.
Okay. I think it's been fantastic. I'll leave that question with you, which is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before I do the tradition of asking you a final question?
Oh, okay. I just want to put it out there for people to think about. Like anyone who calls me to investigate if they should coach with me, I say, well, what's your criteria for happiness?
Ooh.
And most people don't know. They'll say, that's a good question. I don't know. So I want to put that seed out there to our listeners today. What's your criteria for happiness? And I mean that in context of your work.
It's a very good one. What would be yours?
So my criteria for happiness in work is variety, high stakes. I like high stakes. Lots of flexibility. Like I love to look down at my calendar and see a lot of open space.
Oh.
So I've always played the game of how do I make more money in less time?
I love that. I think it's a very good question. I've just been listening to you. It's been very inspiring. I think if I were to think about mine, I definitely resonate with the piece around flexibility. I am a huge fan and guilty of using time blocking though. So I love seeing when my time is going in terms of like what's happening when. When it's too empty, I'm actually worried, which like you said, you don't have to worry. But anyhow, I think mine would be meaning. I think this is what got me to leave this place in the first place, as in this place, the corporate place in the first place. is lack of meaning. I love this question. So yeah, anyone listening to this, obviously feel free to email me back and I can share those as well with Laura. I think this is a very important question that you've just been asking. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So the final one I do have is, what would be the one word summarizing the conversation we just had today?
Wow. The word that keeps coming to me is truth.
Oh, yes. I like that. Very much like that.
Truth with some extra finger snapping.
Ooh, yeah. Truth with a vibe. I like
it. There you go.
I love it. Well, Laura, I cannot thank you enough for coming in today. It was a pleasure to have you. Obviously, we'll make sure we include your details along with this podcast episode for anyone who would like to reach out to you. Keep this conversation going. And thank you for being the final guest of season 2. What a pleasure to finish the season and the year with you.
Thank you. Happy 2024 to everyone as we end 2023.
100%. 100%. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with anyone you believe would benefit from hearing it. Because as you know, life is too short to feel unfulfilled at work.